The National Rifle Association's Under Wild Skies is brought to you by NRA Sports, by Swarovski Optic, see the unseen, and by Dallas Safari Club. Let your membership support your passion.
Botswana's Okavango Delta is a jewel in the heart of the Kalahari Desert. From its headwaters in Angola, the Okavango River flows into Botswana before fanning out into a shallow floodplain that acts as a magnet for wildlife. Here, herds of buffalo graze in the thousands, big cats roam like ghosts in the Palm Islands, and plains game flock to the green flush of grass in an otherwise pitiless place. But it is the elephant that most symbolizes Botswana's Okavango Delta. Loxundata africana, the largest land mammal on Earth. The Okavango is an ideal habitat for these magnificent beasts, but their large numbers stress that habitat to its limit. Recent years have seen record floods in the Delta, but the dry years will return, and when they do, it is feared the elephant population will crash. Already the condition of the herds seems to be falling off. Subtle changes to Western eyes, but through the eyes of a man who has lived alongside these stunning beasts, the changes are worrying.
The overall condition of the elephant females and the young were worrying. I haven't seen for a long time. What I've seen then is actually ribs sticking out from elephants. Spines are more defined, and you can just see that the condition all over is not good. It's a true example of not enough food and too many elephants.
Botswana is dangerously overpopulated to the tune of 150 to 170,000 elephant here. They reproduce at 10 or 12% a year. The land can support 40,000. So when you drive through these areas and you see this great devastation, there's nothing that's going to stop that other than reducing elephant numbers. Botswana has had 6 or 7 years of record water. Well, there's a drought coming. Now, I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year or 5 years from now. But with those elephant numbers going up and with them hitting the vegetation the way they're hitting it, when that drought comes, there will be a massive die-off. And that, to me, is a serious waste. It's a shame. They're great beasts, and to see them die like that because we didn't do what we could have done to help it is sad. The revenue that's lost, the habitat that's lost, is regrettable because it's preventable.
And before the coals of the first campfire have cooled, the hunt for elephant is already underway.
My son Kobus and Mario was on their way back to camp because we asked them to come back earlier to spend the rest of the afternoon with us. Just before dark they arrived and told us about an elephant that they saw. And I decided that we will go back to the same spot the next day where they saw the elephant, pick up the track, and then it would be quite a day of tracking.
Coming up on the National Rifle Association's Under Wild Skies. In Africa, nothing is ever quite what it seems, and nothing comes easy. The plot thickens in the islands of the fan palms under wild skies. Make no mistake, Loxundata africana, the African elephant, is the true king of the jungle. Their size alone affects the area's water and vegetation levels to such a degree, they are considered the keystone species virtually everywhere they exist. In Botswana, the elephant population has exploded, and while everyone delights at seeing huge herds of these most majestic creatures, they are literally eating themselves and other species out of house and home. Bull elephants are particularly hard on woodlands. In one night of feeding, acres of trees appear as if swept by a hurricane. Debate rages in the scientific community about how best to control the exploding numbers, but few argue how one small piece of the pie, commercial hunting, is the best solution for feeding Africa's hungry. An elephant is a meat animal. That's not said lightly. More than 2 tons of meat can be harvested from a bull, and that protein will feed the community for months. In that sense, elephant are very much a keystone hunt as well.
My first elephant this safari was pretty interesting because Quobus had been coming back in from a hunt the night before with no way, saw this big elephant, goes, he's over in this area, let's go see if we can find him in the morning. And so we went over and started looking for him and found him and thought, well, you know, this is pretty easy. First thing in the morning, and there he is. I was using the 86 Winchester, the Turnbull in .475, and Johan and I talked about it, and I kind of wanted a side brain shot because, you know, that's not as powerful a cartridge as a 470 or a 500 nitro or certainly the 577, and I was a little worried about penetration.
We've got a problem. We've got another bull in front of him. He's the one at the back. We've got basically no wind, so we need to get close to him. And I'd rather not, with open sight, shoot right into the sun.
This old bull had one other bull with him, which was between us and the older bull. Now, sun was against us, the sun was right in our eyes, the wind were against us, and as I tried to get Tony into a position to make a brain shot on this elephant, the younger bull spotted us, the other bull became inquisitive, and now instead of having an elephant bull standing sideways, we had an elephant bull that were coming towards us.
I want you to be ready. We don't have the sticks. We don't have time for the sticks. We're not going to have them. So I come back. But the front doors won't work. If he does, shoot him on the heel. On the ear.
So that didn't exactly work out as planned. The elephant eventually turned and not ran off, but just got out of our way to a safe distance, which the elephant feel not threatened.
Let's just let him just relax.
So he gave me the frontal, and I should have taken it, as it turns out, but I didn't. And he got mad at us and got a couple of mock charges, and then they kind of went off at a pretty good pace and basically started going island to island, which is quite easy for them and quite hard for us. And so we had to follow him for, you know, what ended up being several hours.
He got into the water, quite deep water, and then went through to a different island. And he's completely aware of the fact that we are pursuing him. So we got ourselves back to the vehicles and then drove around the water and made an approach on these elephants, which was several hundred yards, maybe a half a K, 500 meters away from us, maybe a little bit more. Walking through this thick islands with date palms is not easy. Within minutes, our clothes were torn to shreds. It's a lot of noise. Every step you make is an alarming sound to every other animal around. So as we reached the point where we were in the middle between the younger bull and the older bull saw our movement as he was walking towards us out of the corner of his eye and started to pick his hand up looking at us and made the shot impossible. I said to Tony, if it presents you with a side brain shot, because the distance is not fast, within 30 yards, and you can pull off that shot, take it at your time. The shot didn't present itself at all. Now the elephant knows that we are on him again a second time.
Unless you want me to hard lung him. I get myself on the spot, but every time I get you just...
I realized for a moment that we basically reached the end of the hunt. But being the person I am and being the the person Tony and the crew is, we decided that we're just going to stick onto this elephant.
Next, on the National Rifle Association's Under Wild Skies, an old 86 stares down the largest land mammal on Earth into the fan palms of the Okavango floodplains. It's time to watch your step under wild skies.
The National Rifle Association's Under Wild Skies is brought to you by NRA Sports, by Blaser, Trigger Your Passion, by Kevins.com, for over 40 years where the hunt begins, and by Hornady, accurate, deadly, dependable.
The National Rifle Association's Under Wild Skies host Tony Macris is deep in the Fan Palm Islands of the Okavango Delta. A decision to not take a frontal brain shot on a big Botswana elephant means the bull is well aware of his pursuers, and the situation is getting more and more dangerous as the bull heads into thicker cover. With professional hunter Johan Kalitz, Tony finds that getting a clear look at an animal, even as big as an elephant, is much easier said than done.
I realized for a moment that we basically reached the end of the hunt. But being the person I am and being the person Tony and the crew is, we decided that we're just going to stick onto this elephant. We're just going to, keep tracking and see what happens. And about 300-400 yards later, the elephants got to an edge of an island. I got myself into the position to left and realized that the big bull is to the left, and it's the bull in front of us, which we can shoot or could shoot, is not the bull we wanted. We got into that fan palm again and slowly got ourselves in position with a lot of difficulty through all the hooks of that fan palm to a position where we can maybe get a shot.
And so finally we made a move around and he turned, and Johan said, go ahead and take him. And it was a rather quick thing. I didn't have time for much. I just pulled the hammer back and shot him.
Great shot there, Tony. Come on, well done. Okay, reload.
I'm ready.
Okay, wait, there's another one.
Got him.
Johan had said he was going to back me, and when I pulled the trigger, if you watch it, you can hear my gun go boom, and you see the elephant start to collapse, and you hear another boom. And Johan had been prepared to shoot him in the heart as a backing shot, and literally the elephant fell out from under his sight. So the 475 did it, and I was tickled to death. And as we cut the elephant up, and the villagers took the meat off, we found that bullet penetrated extremely well.
Well, guess what?
The 475 works on the elephant.
It can do it. Well done. Congratulations.
Did you see he went down as soon as I hit it,
Yeah.
didn't he? I mean, I appreciate the backing shot. I wanted you to do that. I asked you to.
But he went straight down.
But he went straight down.
Yeah, congratulations. Gee, that was quite a morning, eh?
You know, a lot of people would have given up when you spooked off of his first time, and you didn't. Eh, Susu?
Yes, sir.
Hey.
Johan, once again, I can't thank you enough. You always indulge me in my field trials and experiments, and I'm a great fan of John Browning's designs. I've taken a lot with an 86 Winchester, and we've used it in Africa before in the 50 Express. But a couple of years ago, Doug Turnbull necked the 50 down to a 475 Turnbull, a proprietary cartridge, got more velocity, serious modern bullets out of it, and we wondered, we'd kill buffalo with it successfully, and we wondered if it would with a solid kill an elephant. And I know you had your doubts. I asked you to back me, just to make sure. We weren't brave to try the frontal shot, we tried the side shot, but it worked.
It did work, and he picked that head up high to look, because he could hear us, but he just couldn't see us. Something was wrong, and that's when I said to you, take him on the ear.
Yeah.
And that Turnbull
you know, when it hit him, he went straight down.
Straight down.
So well done, great shot. And there he is, a beautiful bull.
Nice bull.
Just
Great
over
ivory.
16 pounds, 42 sticking out, 18 at the lip. That other tusk might be 43, but really, really beautiful
So you think
bull.
he's over 60?
He's over 60
Yeah,
pounds,
nice.
yeah.
Well, when you have a hunt like that, you know, I've had people ask me before, they said, you always seem kind of down when you're talking over the animal afterwards. I don't think any proper hunter is not a little bit sad when he kills something.
No, not at all. It's that sadness and the compassion that makes us what we are. If we don't shed a tear after taking down and harvest a big old bull like this, then there's something wrong with you. Then you're cold-hearted.
I'll never forget the first time I saw the villagers come to harvest their elephant. It had a profound effect on how I view hunting and furthered my resolve to tell the sport's true stories. The scene I witnessed, both man and pachyderms, has played out over thousands of years. Ancient cave paintings and axe marks and mammoth skulls remind us that through hunting, man evolved and developed and is still doing so today. For me, every elephant I take is a celebration of Thanksgiving for the elephant and for the African people, and for every moment I'm able to spend in the bush under wild skies.
This is my first meeting.
This is our second one.
This will be my second one.
Second.
This is my first time at the NRA convention. I come every year.
This is the biggest crowd I've seen in 6 years.
I'd always wanted to come to an annual meeting.
Never been to this kind of convention before.
This place is
crazy.
It's a camaraderie.
Great opportunity to bring the family together.
Check out all the new gear.
Get to see a lot of new product.
Hang out with people that have the same mindset that we do about the Second Amendment.
Everybody from all across the country coming together with one thing in common.
It's our constitutional right to bear arms.
I like hearing from Chris Cox and Wayne LaPierre in person.
We're the most powerful civil rights organization in American history because we fight with a passion, a principle, and an honesty our opponents simply can't match.
It's time to get back to what real, true Americans want. That no matter the threat, the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Where else are our kids going to learn what it looks like to be men and women with integrity and morals and values?
I'm proud that I bring a different voice and face to the NRA.
We have a society that tells women two things simultaneously. The first thing that they tell us is that we are empowered and we can do anything that we want to do, but you're too stupid to own and carry a gun.
I'm really looking to be a voice for women in Utah and in the NRA.
And what better way to empower myself than to take my safety into my own hands?
We will not let anyone take away our guns. That is what established the United States of America.
The press and the fake news, they say tell their side of the story, and we need somebody like the NRA to tell our side of the story.
I think in this day and age, don't ever be ashamed to have that NRA sticker on the back of your pickup.
The NRA is important because they protect our Second Amendment rights along with all the other constitutional rights.
The NRA is very astute in knowing that it's the First Amendment as well.
It's the front line. They're in Washington lobbying for us. They're in every state.
There's no place I'd rather be and no people in the world I'd rather fight beside. You are the most committed and most worthy group of modern-day patriots. We are the National Rifle Association of America, and we are freedom's safest place.
Gun owners all over this country are eager to again stand and fight for their freedom. We love our country. We cherish our freedom. We believe in America as the greatest nation on earth.
NRA TV with Grant Stinchfield. Well, hi there, folks. Welcome to the program. Barack Obama has returned. Yes, the left can rejoice. The savior took some time away from his Hollywood friends to write an op-ed for the Time 100 publication. And, of course, just like the old days, he used the opportunity to slam gun owners in his ultimate quest to destroy the second. In his piece, President Obama claimed to honor the Parkland students. In reality, all he did was attack the NRA. Here is the stone-cold truth. If Barack Obama is writing anything that deals with the Parkland students, it should be an apology. His liberal, no discipline for rule breakers policy was a contributing factor that enabled the shooter to wreak the havoc that he did at Stoneman Douglas. I'm talking about Barack Obama's federal school discipline guidance policies, adopted by Superintendent Robert Runcie, a friend of Obama's Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. All three of them hail from, where else but Chicago. It was Obama's school discipline policies that prevented Parkland faculty members from having students arrested, even for severe and repeated discipline issues. Even if a student was a potential threat to himself or others, even if the student threatened his peers, all things, by the way, that the Parkland shooter exhibited and did more than once, mind you. But because of Obama's policies, because of his Secretary of Education, and because of their Chicago ally, Robert Runcie, police never arrested the shooter, so he had no problem getting his hands on a gun. Barack Obama, you owe the Parkland students an apology. For years, the NRA has been the biggest supporter of hardening our schools and allowing responsible trained educators to carry for the protection of their students. But instead of doing the right thing, instead of working with us to install common sense security in all of our schools, you continue to attack the NRA and its nearly 6 million members, calling us, quote, mere shills for those who make money selling weapons of war to whoever can pay, and accusing us of, quote, scare tactics, while in the same article praising Black Lives Matter as some peaceful organization making America, as you say, more compassionate. For the record, Mr. Obama, NRA members don't burn down cities and we don't incite riots against our police. The leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement do, and that is indisputable. As expected, like a typical gun-hating socialist, Barack Obama couldn't resist bringing the theme of inequality into his Times piece, writing, as these young leaders make common cause with African Americans and Latinos, the disproportionate victims of gun violence. Gangbangers use illegal guns to kill each other at an epidemic level. And he wants to blame law-abiding gun owners, NRA members, hundreds of miles away, mind you, from the inner cities of Chicago, Baltimore, and Detroit, and all the other cities plagued with violence. Barack Obama, if you want to talk about inequality and gun violence, you are the biggest perpetrator of it. Because while you left educators defenseless, while you pushed policies that barred violent students from being arrested, while you railed against the NRA, your daughters, yourself, were all protected by armed guards. Your daughter's in a school with strict discipline policies in place at all times, because you knew that's what makes schools safer. Discipline, order, and as a last case scenario, good guys with guns. But that was only good enough for your family. The Parkland students you now write about in Time magazine, that protection wasn't good enough for them. You played politics with their lives, and now you have duped them into thanking you for it when you're the one who should be apologizing. Barack Obama, you were in it, and you coddled these thugs. Your policies coddled these thugs. Had every child been given the same armed security yours were protected by, there never would have been a Parkland massacre for you to weaponize in your Time magazine hit piece attacking the NRA. So let me make this clear, Mr. Obama. NRA members don't need your apology. In fact, we don't want it. But Parkland students, apologize to them. They deserve it, and you owe it to them. Well, the deep state in Washington continues to rise to the surface. What started as a cloaked, concerted effort to undermine the president is now a war being waged openly against him. The latest example is the absolute refusal by Democrats to confirm Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. The president has a right to appoint who he wants to his cabinet, barring there's no glaring or constitutional issue with that appointment. The Senate has a duty to confirm him. Lives depend on it. President Trump's Secretary of State is dispatched across the world to keep the peace. Each day without someone at the helm of the State Department is another day Americans are put at risk. And sadly, it's another day deep state anti-Trumpers within the State Department get to do their ill bidding. And there are still many of them. They can operate without a watchful and skeptical eye over them. As Democrats know this, ultimately there are two things at play here. The Democrats in the Senate just want to make life difficult for the president with no regard for our safety and security. But the other reason is much more devious. They are buying time for their Clinton loyalists still inside the State Department, buying time for them to continue to disrupt the Trump foreign policy agenda. The Senate needs to act, and the Democrats need to stop acting like vindictive lunatics. The State Department warns U.S. travels right now to Brazil can be very dangerous. The warning includes strong statements about visiting favelas and some crime-ridden beaches. NRA TV's Chuck Holton took our cameras inside some of Rio's most dangerous communities. He's back this morning to wrap up 5 days of exclusive coverage. Chuck, so you took a hard look at all of this. I took a hard look at the State Department warnings and warnings from the UK's Foreign Office. It is clear there is a serious problem of crime in Brazil.
Without a doubt, Grant, the crime is spilling out of the slums and down into the tourist areas now, to the point where there are troops stationed along the beaches in Copacabana and Ipanema and elsewhere. Just in Copacabana alone, I'm told that there are over 700 federal troops and law enforcement agents that have been deployed there because the crime has gotten so bad and the violence has gotten so bad. We've been talking about the app that we put on our phones that would alert us to the shootings happening around us while we were there. And I finally had to just turn it off last night because it was just blowing up my phone. I couldn't get any sleep. And even right there in Copacabana, this is the most exclusive neighborhoods of Rio. We saw federal soldiers, troops, lined up down the boardwalk protecting beachgoers over the last several days. And that's a big change. So it obviously is a major problem. As we talk to people over the last 5 days, Grant, the central thing that they kept coming back to is, I just wish that I could protect myself. Well, I can't tell you how many people we talked to who said, man, it is so impossible to get a gun here to protect yourself. So the only people that have the guns are the bad guys, and we can do nothing. Several people, women included, said, I have to pretend that I have the right to carry a gun when somebody approaches me in the street and tries to rob me. I've had to stick my hand in my purse and say, you better go away, I've got a gun, and hope that they'll run away. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if you could actually have the right to protect yourself rather than having to pretend to have the right to protect yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of it really should serve as a warning, and we've talked about this, Chuck, of what happens when these liberal policies are instituted. What happens when the communities and countries are disarmed? Basically, violence takes over, the criminals take over. That's exactly what we're seeing in Brazil. When you say there's just a handful of guns in that country and like 60,000 murders a year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Far fewer guns than the United States has per capita, but yet 19 of the 50 most dangerous cities in the world are in Brazil. So back years ago, the government essentially declared the whole of the country a gun-free zone. And you can see what's happened since. So obviously that's not working. Now, the good news is that they have presidential elections coming up in October, and the front runner at this point is a guy named Jair Bolsonaro. I had to write it down to remember it. And this guy they are calling him the Donald Trump of Latin America. Now, he is a populist candidate. He's pushing for reforms, and one of the big things he's saying is that he is going to make it easier for regular citizens, law-abiding citizens, to get guns to protect themselves, and it is making his popularity go through the roof. When you look at some of the speaking engagements that he's done, even in very remote parts of Brazil, he's had just wild support from the people there. And that goes back to another vote that they had back in 2005, where 60+% of the people in the country voted to continue to allow civilians to be able to buy firearms. Unfortunately, the government tried to legislate around the will of the people by creating this mammoth bureaucracy, incredible costs, like we've talked about over the last few days, to make it almost impossible, virtually impossible, for any regular citizen to have a gun. Now, it's another case, just like you were talking about with Barack Obama, of, you know, what's good for me is not for thee, where the government officials and you know, state officials, people that had a lot of money, were able to pull some strings, and it was all in who you know to be able to get a gun. But any law-abiding citizen that tried to do so legally, it was virtually impossible. And even if you did get one, you couldn't use it.
And then what we've seen, obviously, as you've been reporting on, is crime exploding. So it's sad in Brazil. There's not many neighborhoods left for the girl from Ipanema to go walking, is there?
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, the guy that we interviewed yesterday that owned that gun store said, please, please, if I had a message to give to the United States, do not allow people to infringe on that right that you have in your Constitution to keep and bear arms, because we are we are what it looks like when you let that right get taken away, and we will not. You know, he's just saying, do not allow that to happen. I kept showing him pictures of my guns and that sort of thing, and he didn't like. He was like, just go. I don't even want to see it. It's just, it hurts to see your freedoms because we don't have those.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Chuck Colton, thank you, buddy. Get some rest. We got the weekend coming up, and we'll see you on Monday. All right, California spends billions of dollars annually on illegal immigrants a year, but very few bring that point up. Austin Fletcher has a new video out. You know, Fleckus Talks. He's a great friend of this program. The dollar amount and the feedback from California locals is refreshing. We'll talk about that more with Austin at the top of the next hour and show you some of his new video. And they are always entertaining and informing, to say the least. So stick around for that. I'm Brent Speechfield.
NRA TV with Grant Stinchfield.
A century ago, in August, the Great War broke out. This is one of the most cataclysmic events in human history. This week in our feature story, we'll show you the infantry rifles of the great powers at the start of the war. This week in our Rifleman Review, Senior Executive Editor Brian Sheets shoots the new Ruger American chambered in .22 rimfire. For I Have This Old Gun, we'll show you the Thompson submachine gun as modified for speed of economy. That gun is the M1A1. But right now, let's look at the guns of August.
When we talk about the guns of August, we're looking at the actual guns that were used during the Great War, what we all now call the First World War. The world stage was pretty interesting back then in 1914. There had not been a sizable conflict to field test a lot of the innovations in firearms technology that had taken place since, say, the end of our own American Civil War in 1865.
The latter half of the 19th century was a period of incredible innovation in firearms. You went from percussion muzzleloaders to fully contained metallic cartridges. You went from black powder to smokeless powder. You went from large bore, fairly slow bullets with parabolic trajectories to smaller Spitzer-shaped bullets. There was a lot going on in terms of small arms development. the introduction of the magazine rifle, meaning the bolt action or straight pull repeating rifle. There was the introduction of the charger or stripper clip that allowed for rapid reloading. The problem with the major European powers is they did not really understand the full implication of that kind of firepower in the hands of large forces of armed men.
The remarkable thing about all the standard infantry rifles of World War I is that they're all about yay long. And they're heavy, they're clumsy, they're awkward, burdensome to use, and the barrels were excessively long. And I think the only explanation for it is that it was a vestigial leftover from Napoleonic War thinking. They believed in pikemen more than riflemen.
This was the first major land war in Europe in a century since Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo. There was a sea change of firearms development between the period of 1815 and 1914. Most important was the magazine rifle, the small bore magazine rifle. This started in 1886 with the French Lebel rifle, and what the Lebel brought to the table was a new cartridge, 8mm Lebel. It used smokeless powder. The French called it poudre bee, and it was devised by a Frenchman by the name of Paul Viel.
The Lebel was simply a holdover from black powder days. It was roughly comparable to the Mauser 7184, namely a bolt-action repeater using a tubular magazine. And the French, although they led in many other respects of ordnance, the French, maybe they were excessively budget-minded, I don't know, but they always insisted on trying to upgrade old guns, rather than starting with a clean sheet of paper and developing new ones.
It incorporated a tube magazine, much like a Winchester or a Swiss Vetterli, that was under the barrel, held 8 rounds, and it was a massive machined receiver, bolt action, and the rifle really symbolized what the concept of the French army had on warfare. It was the attack. And the idea was that you got a long enough bayonet, and with the Lebel rifle having this long quatreform bayonet, the idea was you were always on the attack. So the thing of long-range shooting and defensive fire and so forth, although the Lebel does have a cutoff and it can keep the cartridges in the magazine to be loaded single fire, that really wasn't the concept of the French army at that time.
Coming up after the break, we will continue our look at the rifles of the great powers from the Great War. Major combatant powers in 1914. Of course, things got started when a Serbian separatist assassinated Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, and Serbia and Austria-Hungary went to war. And then, of course, because of the treaty system, Russia came into the war on the side of Serbia. Germany came into the war on the side of Austria. And, of course, then the French and British came in on the side of Belgium and Russia with the invasion of Belgium in 1914. There are several patterns of rifle in use at this time by the great powers. In particular, the Mauser. The Gewehr 98 was the German standard infantry service rifle of this time. Chambered 8mm Mauser. It was really probably the finest bolt-action rifle of its day.
The Gewehr 98 rifle, also known as the Model 1898, German infantry rifle, was really a marked advance in the whole development of military rifles and even in Mauser rifles. This rifle had 5-shot capacity, was also charger loaded, and so you could just crank rounds all day out of it. And a long barrel, was extremely accurate, and it stayed in service literally unchanged through World War I. There were some slight modifications, but basically it stays the same until 1935.
The 98 has been the bolt-action rifle from which all other commercial guns, the Model 700, the Model 70 Winchester, all these other guns have basically been derived. The Model 98 Gewehr is just iconic. Nothing else on the battlefield could possibly supersede it.
All of the major powers who were combatants back in 1914 had by then adopted charger loading rifles. That was the one lesson that they had picked up from the previous century. The Belgians went to war with the earliest pattern of charger-loaded Mausers, basically dating to 1890-91. It was back in the day when it was believed, it was eventually discarded, that barrels had to be encased in a sheet metal jacket in order to protect the shooter's hand when bayonet fighting, which again preoccupied everyone's military thinking at the time.
The Belgian 1889 was chambered in 7.65 Belgian. It was really one of the first small-bore, smokeless powder Mauser rifles adopted by anyone, fed from a 5-shot magazine, and it was fed by stripper clips. The charger loading or stripper clip loading of infantry rifles at this time was hugely important in terms of the amount of firepower that an individual rifleman could produce.
The rifle was issued throughout the Belgian forces, and what was interesting was that this was the beginning of the national armory system in Belgium. This is the beginning of FN, Fabrique Nationale. Fabrique Nationale started cranking out the 1889. So that's what Belgium used when it was invaded by Germany in August of 1914. And at that time, the British would term it gallant little Belgium, was losing ground pretty quickly. Nearly all of Belgium was overrun during the war and was behind German lines, and so the rifles were then made by both Birmingham Small Arms in England and also by Hopkins and Allen in Massachusetts, USA.
In 1914, it was not understood what the magazine rifle meant. When you start looking at the casualty reports from World War I, there certainly was brutal bayonet fighting, but it wasn't that common. The real killers on the battlefield of World War I, at first rifles, before lots of machine guns were introduced, then artillery. Quick-firing artillery was the biggest killer of infantrymen during the Great War. Coming up after the break, we'll test the Ruger American rimfire, if you can find .22 ammunition.
Well, this week we're taking a look at a really interesting new rifle from Ruger. It's the Ruger American, but this is the American rimfire. Ruger came out with the American centerfire about a year or so ago, and with that gun they really pioneered the use of very high quality and yet inexpensive methods and materials that gave you a high quality rifle at a good price. With the American rimfires, Ruger's taken that one step further and combined the concept of the American centerfire with, of course, rimfire chambering, and also added in some of its signature qualities from rimfire rifles in days gone by. In this case, we have the rotary magazine, which dates back to 1964, There are 4 versions of the Ruger Rimfire American. There's the compact version, which is an 18-inch barrel in either case, long rifle or magnum, and a short length of pull stock. And then there's the standard model with a 22-inch barrel and a longer length of pull. Now, in both cases, the replaceable butt pad and sheet piece accommodates either iron sight use, which is available on all guns, or scope use with a raised comb. And these pieces will fit all 4 versions interchangeably. So you really have a lot of versatility with regard to size and fitting younger shooters. And of course, these guns are great for younger shooters because they're bolt actions, they've got built-in iron sights, they've got a flush-fitting rotary magazine so they can be rested on a bench or bags very easily. All in one, and it allows the removal of the bolt without pressing the trigger. And then, of course, you've got the trigger itself, which has a safety blade in the trigger. It's called a marksman trigger. And then the tang safety is right up here where the firing hand thumb can naturally fall on it. And there's a big red F for fire and an S engraved in the tang for safe. So all those features make operating the Ruger really safe, and the bolt throw, by the way, is only 60 degrees, so that's a fairly quick to manipulate bolt, and yet it's all very safe and methodical for the young shooter particularly. You've got on the top built-in 3/8 grooves for 22 scopes, or tip-off, so-called tip-off style scope rings. Then you've also got a receiver that's drilled and tapped, and it will take standard Weaver bases for larger rings for, say, fitting a Weaver rail. So all in all, with the Ruger American, you've got grown-up features in a rimfire rifle that, especially in its compact guise, is particularly suitable for the younger shooter. To even sweeten the deal, Ruger has included a $10 off NRA membership coupon with each American rifle. These guns are a real value.
The M1921 and M1928 Thompsons were things of beauty. Blued steel, fins, they could take drums, all sorts of things you don't need when you just need a submachine gun in a hurry. And that gun was the M1A1 Thompson.
The M1A1 Thompson submachine gun was really a simplification of the earlier Tommy gun, which had been developed by General John Thompson during the latter stages of World War I.
John T. Thompson's whole idea of his full automatic submachine gun in .45 caliber was to have something that was kind of a delayed blowback. And so John Blish designed a block of bronze and steel that interlocked that allowed the bolt just a split-second delay as the friction between those two types of metal dropped the block and allowed the action to cycle. And that was the key to the success, or so it was thought, of the Thompson. Interesting thing is that when you take that Blish block out of a gun, they work just fine.
During World War II production, Thompsons were being manufactured by Auto Ordnance Corporation and Savage. Now, designers at Savage recognized immediately that there were certain aspects of the Thompson design that could be eliminated to produce the firearm at a far more affordable price. In addition to being more affordable, they could also produce the firearm far more quickly. And so what they produced was a Thompson submachine gun without cuts compensator, without cooling fins, without a Lyman rear sight, with a phosphate finish that's cheap and easy to put on in comparison to the deep blue finish, that no longer accepts the drum magazines but accepts box magazines only. They also found that the Thompson submachine gun ran just fine without the Blish lock. Savage Arms Corporation comes up with this prototype that is ultimately adopted into the American military under the designation first M1, then M1A, then M1A1. And the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun sees service through to the end. It's really easy to pick one out If you're trying to identify what's a 28 Thompson and what's an M1A1 Thompson, on the M1928A1 Thompson submachine gun, the bolt handle is on top of the receiver. On the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun, it's on the side of the receiver.
The M1A1 was issued to mainly scouts, vehicle drivers, anyone who needed a lot of firepower and was not armed with a regular rifle, but needed firepower quickly, and more so than you'd get with, say, a 30 caliber M1 carbine. They used them throughout the European theater, used them throughout the Pacific.
The M1s and M1A1s were probably made in the largest numbers of any of the Thompson models. And they generally work very well because of the shape of the cartridge and the very long feed throat that is built into the front of the receiver. Once a cartridge comes out of the magazine and sticks its nose in that feed trough, there isn't any place for it to go except into the chamber.
With the M1A1, you predict what's going to be happening in the post-war economy with other firearms, which is to say that manufacturers are really looking for a way to produce them at a lower price point so that the saleability is still there and the broad access to the firearm is still there. Of course, nowadays, when you look at the price of a Thompson, fully transferable Thompson machine gun, none of that matters because they're all fairly expensive. But the M1A1 was a significantly less costly gun to produce than its predecessor.
Of course, real M1A1 Thompsons are machine guns, fully automatic, but there are semi-automatic versions made today by Auto Ordnance. That's all the time that we have for this week. If you like this show and you're not an NRA member, sign up right now at AmericanRifleman.org. I'm Mark Keefe, and I'll see you next week right here on American Rifleman Television.
One of the biggest concerns I hear from my students is not knowing how they will react in a life-threatening situations. I get questions like, will I freeze and forget everything I know? Will I be afraid? Will I do what I'm supposed to do? While it is true that you can never be completely prepared for that specific moment, it's also true that proper training and learning about what to expect can help. In this episode of Tips and Tactics, Applied Firearms Defense Skills instructors Kat and Whitney will explain the different ways our body and our mind will likely react in a life-threatening situation.
In a life-threatening confrontation, your mind and body will be faced with a series of obstacles. Your reaction determines the outcome. Let's look at some psychological responses. Fight. Once you determine that your only option is to fight, act decisively and with a will to win. Flight. This is by far the best option, if at all possible. The use of a firearm in self-defense, even if it's your only viable option, has consequences. So if you can get away, do. Freeze. The more time you get stuck in this phase, the less time you have to process and carry out your plan. Posture. Depending on the situation, a display of your confidence and unwillingness to back down can change the dynamic and diffuse a situation. Submit. This is the worst option. At that point, you're basically giving up. If you can't run from the situation, you have to fight.
Now let's look at some physiological responses. Loss of fine motor skills. In a life-threatening confrontation, your fine motor skills will be the first to go. Tunnel vision. It's almost like your surrounding environment disappears. Auditory exclusion. Concentrating on the threat almost can make sounds go unheard. Skewed perception of time. Although lasting just seconds, the entire event seems to play out in slow motion. Adrenaline rush. Adrenaline dumped into your system can cause your muscles to tremble. It's very important to incorporate stress into your training. Any practice is better than none, but adding some reality-based training into your practice can make all the difference.
Remember, the single most crucial aspect of surviving a life-threatening confrontation is the determination to persevere, prevail, and never give up.
Thank you, Kat and Whitney, for your take on this important subject. I absolutely agree that we have to be determined to persevere and never give up. The best way to keep our mind and our body in sync with our determination is to follow a weekly training program. This will give you confidence in your abilities should you ever encounter a life-threatening situation. I am Gaby Franco, and I'll see you next time in another episode of Tips and Tactics, sponsored by Cabela's Outdoor Fund.
Now this week in our feature story, we continue our look at the guns of August, the basic infantry rifles of 1914. In our Rifleman Review this week, I'm heading to the range with the new Ruger Red Label. The guys at Ruger have made some changes to this classic American side-by-side. For eye of this old gun, you look at the Chinese Type 56. That's the Chinese-made variant of the selective fire Kalashnikov. But for right now, let's step back a century to the guns of August.
When we talk about the guns of August, we're really talking about primarily one gun in August, and that was a Browning semi-automatic 32 caliber 1910 in the hands of a member of the Black Hand Order, Gavrilo Princip. He was able to assassinate almost literally by dumb luck the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie while they visited the independent nation of Serbia from neighboring Austria. This occurred in June of 1914, and really the 2 months that it took between the assassination of the Archduke and the machines of diplomacy to grind on in the beginning of military mobilization, it took 2 months to get that war machine going. And you would think that had anybody at that time been able to look 4 years in the future and seen what had happened as a result of those few little rounds of 32 caliber ammo being fired out of that Browning, you might imagine that they would have worked harder to find some kind of more peaceful solution than what transpired on the Belgian frontier in August of 1914.
Early in the war, the Germans are said to have mistaken British musketry for machine guns, because the soldiers that they faced on some particular occasion were firing their Lee Enfields so quickly that the Germans